Hey, all you fantasy football managers. Jacob Camenker from USA Today here to break down the Week 11 waiver wire as we get closer and closer to the fantasy football playoffs. Now, we're dealing with a couple of key injuries across positions again, and we're also still hunting for some running back values as the position continues to get thinned out as the season goes along. So we'll start with a guy who has more upside than maybe other handcuffs out there in Tyler Allgeier from the Atlanta Falcons. Now, going into the Falcons game against the Colts in Berlin, Allgeier had been kind of an afterthought in their offense, handling 10 carries across 3 games. But against the Colts, he saw 11 carries. Granted, that's behind Bijan Robinson's 17, but Allgeier notably worked near the goal line and was able to get 57 yards and 2 touchdowns. If he continues in that goal line role, he's going to have flex potential, and at the very least, he's a great high-end handcuff to have for a run-heavy Falcons offense. Another NFC South running back to keep an eye on is Sean Tucker with the Buccaneers. Tucker just became the first running back to total more than 50 rushing yards against the New England Patriots in a game this season. He has outworked Rachaad White in recent weeks with Bucky Irving out of the lineup, and White's averaging just 3.7 yards per carry this season. So his lack of efficiency may lead the Buccaneers to turn to Tucker. Now, Bucky Irving is still looming there, and if he comes back, Tucker wouldn't have much of a role. But hey, Irving still hasn't practiced since suffering that shoulder injury against the Eagles back in week 4. So we don't know when he'll be back. That could lead Tucker to have a couple weeks as a lead back in that backfield. Shifting over to the receiver position, Alec Pierce from the Colts is on bye this week, but he's still worth stashing as a flex down the stretch. He's been targeted 35 times over his last 4 games and is averaging 91.5 receiving yards per game during that stretch. He's also one of the league's best down the field threats. He's leading qualified receivers in average yards per reception at 20.9 through week 10. So his explosiveness gives him a higher ceiling than a lot of other guys who plug in at wide receiver 3 or flex. Another veteran receiver to keep an eye on is Darius Slayton with the Giants. Now, look, if Russell Wilson has to start for the Giants, you're probably not going to want Slayton in your lineup. But he has posted a season high in receiving yards in back-to-back games, and that included a 4-catch, 89-yard outing against the Bears in Week 10. Jackson Dart's dealing with a concussion, so we don't know if he'll play in Week 11, but once Dart's back in the lineup, Slayton figures to have a good chance to be his number 1 receiver down the stretch. That's enough to make him a potential flex play if you're desperate at the position. And finally, here's one more guy who's on bye this week, but is worth stashing at tight end. That's Juwan Johnson from the New Orleans Saints. Now, the Saints have actually been a little bit frisky with Tyler Shuck at the quarterback position, and Johnson has scored a touchdown in each of his 2 starts. So I think you're looking at Johnson as a guy who could end up being a higher volume receiving tight end, especially since the Saints are looking for someone to replace Rashid Shaheed's production. And in those 2 Shuck starts, Johnson has generated an average of 3.5 catches and 61 yards per game. So, you can plug him into your lineup at tight end, a position that isn't very deep, and he might end up being able to carry you to a fantasy championship.